So like I mentioned last week, I am recording these. I'm going to be putting these on a YouTube channel that I'll share with you. I didn't get last week's done in time, but the idea is to try to get these uploaded and done at least by Monday following. So that way, in case you miss class or not able to make it, then you can review it that way too. And as always, if you have questions that you want to ask during class, feel free. If it's something that you want to chat about afterwards, once we're done recording, that's perfectly fine too. Okay. So we're on chapter 17 right now. Chapter 17 talks about how man is made in an image of God. So we're starting out by defining what man is. Man is a creature composed of a body and soul and made to the image and likeness of God. Yeah, that coffee's brutal. Okay. Um, so creature composed of body and soul. Everything that's living has a soul, right? So animals, plants, right? They all have a soul. Anything that's living has a soul. And obviously we have a body, right? The thing that makes man different is that second part of the sentence there, made to the image and likeness of God. When we talk about the image and likeness of God, it doesn't mean that God looks like us specifically. We're talking about how his soul, God's soul, is immortal and our soul is immortal, right? So that's the distinction. That's the difference between us and the animals. Talks about how the soul, point number 2 there on page 34, talks about how the soul of man is different from the soul of brute animals. We have senses and instinct, or animals have senses and instinct, but neither reason nor free will. But we have that free will. And the reason why we have that free will is because of the our immortality, essentially, the soul's immortality. Up at the top of page 35, it says, is this likeness to God in the body or in the soul? It's chiefly in the soul. Okay. So we have contained within us an immortal spirit with understanding and free will. Basically, an easy way of understanding it is the fact that we know that we have a soul makes us different, right? Dogs, cats, etc., don't have the ability to, they can't self-reflect, right? They can't look back upon themselves, whereas we can. Because we then can do this, we have self-knowledge, meaning we can choose. We can choose right or wrong. We can choose things that are not necessarily instinctual, right? So a dog, for instance, is always going to choose whatever suits him best in that moment, right? The dog wants food, it's going to go after food. It's not going to be able to do a sacrifice and say, well, I'm going to hold off on eating this because I want to do something greater. It doesn't really do that. Okay. How do we prove that the soul of a man is immortal? The simple answer is because we know that it is. That seems like a circular argument, but an animal does not have the ability to know that it has a soul. We know that we have a soul, right? And we have this concept of immortality. The fact that we know that there are things that are immortal, that we can conceive of things that are immortal, even if we can't fully understand it, we know that that soul then is immortal. The second point at the top of page 35 on the right column there are also many instances of the dead appearing to the living. And these aren't just fever dreams. Yeah, come on in. These aren't just like fever dreams, right? These aren't just coincidences. These are things that if you want to grab a chair and go wherever, you're good. Thanks. There are instances of the dead appearing to the living. Okay, and then we have the belief in the immortality of the soul and the life after death. Okay, so all of this means that our souls are immortal, right? There's something different in us. Chapter 18 talks about Adam and Eve and our first parents. This is one of those articles of the creed that we have to believe, right? That we are called upon to believe as dogmas, as truths of the church. So the first man and woman are Adam and Eve, right? It doesn't matter how you can say, well, scripture was literal. God literally took clay and breathed into it, and that made Adam. Fine, right? We talked about that a couple classes ago. You can believe whatever you want to in terms of how it was done, or you can believe more of an evolutionary way of looking at it. You can believe that there were Homo sapiens and all these different types of early ancestors of humans, and then God took one of those pairs and said, right, you have the soul, Believe whichever you want to. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about evolution. But it says that God cast a deep sleep upon Adam, and taking one of his ribs formed it into Eve. Right? Literally, did God take a rib out and form? Likely not. But what's the metaphor here, right? What's the deeper understanding? Because when we see things that don't quite make sense in Scripture, we have to go, okay, well, there's a reason why it's there, right? The authors weren't just trying to say, literally, God took a rib and formed a woman out of it. What is he trying to say? That in the normal context of things, when we have a man and a woman, right, who are destined to be together, who are destined is the wrong word, but who are meant to be together, that they are a part of each other. God's trying to tell us that in a real sense, right? That in a real sense, but also in a real, in a metaphorical, spiritual sense, that man and women are meant to be tied to one another, right? There's a real part of each other in the spouse. So Adam and Eve were our first parents, and all of mankind comes from this, right? Everyone who is alive today comes from them. We may look slightly different, where there may be traditions, right, that are different. There may be different skin colors, but essentially we are all the same, right? We all come from Adam and Eve, right? We all come from those initial parents. The chief gift, top of page 37, left column there, the chief gift bestowed on Adam and Eve by God was sanctifying grace. Okay, so he created them. He gave them this soul, this immortal soul. And what does this immortal soul mean? That we get to be a part of that eternal life, right? The fact that our souls are supernatural and immortal means that we also have this gift of supernatural life with God. And so he created Adam and Eve in the state of innocence and holiness. In this state we call sanctifying grace, right? That's what this is, sanctifying grace. Sanctifying grace is the life of God inside of our souls. Other gifts that were bestowed on Adam and Eve by God were happiness in the Garden of Paradise, great knowledge, control of the passions by reason, and freedom from suffering and death. So essentially, when he created Adam and Eve, he gave them this paradise, right? This place of living where everything was working great, right? They had great knowledge, they had great understanding of how everything worked. There was no suffering, there was no death, right? When the time came for them to go to heaven, they would just go up into heaven. There was going to be no painful death. This was the gifts, right, that God gave them. He's going to give us a little bit of time on earth, and then you get to go to heaven. He also gave Adam and Eve what's called infused knowledge. Without studying, you just kind of understood things. They understood things like photosynthesis and chlorophyll and how animals moved and how they didn't move, and right, all that kind of stuff. Things that take us years to understand and study, and they probably understood a lot of things that we still don't understand today. They had that, right? That was just infused into them. God bless also Adam and Eve, top of page 37, right column there, with a freedom from subjection to their lower appetites, such as impurity and drunkenness. They had no inclination to evil. Whereas you and I today, it's pretty easy to choose, like, I'm going to overeat, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to cut corners wherever I can. They didn't have that. They were always tending towards the good, right? Think of it like a compass. Their compass was always pointing in exactly the right direction because their souls were completely infused with this knowledge of God. God wanted Adam and Eve to have all of this good stuff, but he also said, hey, I want you to show me that you understand the goodness that you've been given. And this is something that is oftentimes kind of misunderstood. God gave Adam and Eve all this stuff, and you see memes online or something like, okay, hey, you eat this apple, you go to hell, right? Like God is like this trickster or this tyrant. Hey, I'm going to give you everything, but you do this and you're in trouble. Why did God, right? Because we know the story from the Bible that, hey, you can have whatever you want. This is your great place of enjoyment. You can enjoy each other. You can enjoy life. You can enjoy the world. You can enjoy everything. But don't eat of the fruit of this tree, right? He gave them one commandment. Don't eat of the fruit of this tree. There are a lot of people who will say, well, why did he even put that in there? We've talked about this a little bit before about why do we have to practice religion? I think we talked about it the first week. Why do we have to practice religion? What does it need? Does God really need it? Does God need us to practice religion? There's a sense of justice out of it, of practicing religion. But remember we talked about how you need to, exterior actions show an interior state of being, right? If I'm just coming home late every night, for instance, with my wife, I'm coming home late every night and I'm like, and I'm always a jerk and I'm always just like, ugh, right? You didn't do enough, right? But then I turn to her and go, but I really love you. It may be true that I really do love her. Maybe I'm just kind of being a jerk that day, but do my exterior actions mimic or relate to what is in my heart? She's gonna be like, you don't love me. And she wouldn't be wrong for thinking that, even if I do actually love her, right? Our exterior actions have to match what is interior. And so God is like, all right, Adam and Eve, you got all this good stuff. But I need to know, and God already knew, but he's like, I need you to know that you're willing to sacrifice. You don't have death, you don't have pain, you don't have, right? You've got all of this stuff. I need you to do one little thing for you to know that you are choosing me, that you are willing to do this, right? It's similar we can think of it like in a friendship or in a marriage, right? Right? There's always that well, at least in my marriage, there's that debate of like, well, I want you to want to love me, right? I want you to do these things because you love me, right? And that's kind of what God was telling Adam and Eve. I want you to do this. I'm going to give you something that's not that hard. You got all the other fruits, you got all the other animals, you got all the other things. You're good. Just don't eat this one. Show me this one thing that you really do care. Oops, didn't work, right? So they didn't obey the commandment of God. So we're going to do a sidestep for a minute and talk about evolution in the Bible. We've already talked about this a little bit, chapter 19. How did the body of the first man originate? We must believe that it was created by God. You can believe, like I said, you can believe that God literally just formed clay out of the earth and breathed a soul into it. Perfectly fine. Not scientifically accurate, probably, but you can believe that, right? That's not an issue. Point number 2 there on page 38 says, Holy Scripture was not written for the purpose of serving as a technical reference work in science. The sacred writer's aim was to tell the story of creation for the belief of people, not for scientific investigation, right? And so then this book goes through the theory of evolution. And again, this book was written like in the 30s, 20s, 30s, something like that. So again, there's going to be some things in there that are a little bit off from what we understand today. But broadly, there's no problem in believing in evolution. What do we have to believe, right? There are many Protestants out there, there are fundamentalist Christians out there, for instance, who will say, you cannot believe in evolution. If you do, then you are saying that God had no place in this. And that's not exactly the case. There's this concept called theistic evolution, right? So God-centered evolution, where we can believe that everything evolved and all the science is true, but that God was keeping all of it in check, that God was making it all happen. My personal belief, again, this is up to you, but my personal belief is that evolution all happened and animals, apes, whatever, got to a point of getting really close to being human, right? Having opposable thumbs and all the things. And then God went and infused a soul into our first two parents, right? The early hominids or Homo sapiens or whatever. That's what I believe. You can believe whatever you'd like. There are some who believe that God created literally from nothing and just two parents appeared. That could be the case too. God can do anything, right? So we don't really have to concern ourselves too much with that. So the first thing is God created everything out of nothing, right? That God infused a soul into the humans, right? That's the second thing. And third, Adam and Eve are our first parents. The soul is not created, the soul is not created by materially, right? The soul is supernatural. So when parents, when a baby is conceived, right, the parents are playing the part in the creation of the body, right, of the baby. God infuses the soul in, right? That's God's work. Okay, so similar thing here with evolution, possibly, or just creation. So babies are born, or babies are conceived. The parents make the body. God makes the soul. Okay, and then Adam and Eve are our first parents. So man's soul is not derived from his parents. That's why we say that there's no, that parent sin is not part of the children, or vice versa, because they're individual souls and they're judged individually. How many centuries are there from Adam to Christ? The church has never given a decision. We don't know. Okay. All right, chapter 20, original sin. There's a famous atheist who's a writer who said, the easiest doctrine of the church to understand and the hardest one to disprove is the Catholic doctrine of original sin. He goes, because you look around and you see it. You can see that there is a flaw in humankind, in all of us. And there is a flaw in us. So Adam and Eve, what happened on account of their sin? They lost sanctifying grace, meaning the life of God was out of their soul. They lost the right to heaven, right? So Adam and Eve had the right to it, right? It belonged to them. Now it's lost. They lost their special gifts, right? All that knowledge we talked about. They became subject to death and to suffering. And now they started to have a strong inclination towards evil. And then they were driven from the Garden of Paradise. They lost God's abiding grace and friendship. They lost sanctifying grace, their special gifts, suffering and death, right? All these things. So what does that mean? It means that you can think of it in a way that they were pretty close to angels in terms of how smart they were, how much of an understanding they had, and also a gift of understanding God. And when they sinned, you can almost think of it like a clouding or a veil that went over their souls. They lost all of this stuff, right? And this loss of this sanctifying grace then was also passed along to the children that they would have, which means it was passed along to all of us. This sin, top of page 41, this sin is called original sin. It's the state in which every descendant of Adam comes into the world totally deprived of grace through inheriting the punishment not of Adam's personal sin, but of his sin as head of the human race. So sins are not passed down, right? Except for this one. This is the one that is passed down. Why? We are not maintaining the guilt of Adam for committing that sin, but we are inheriting that lack, right? Adam can only pass along what he has, right? And he passed along this state of being in original sin. It's not fair. Agreed. It isn't. It's not fair. It's kind of crappy. But in the similar way to the decisions of the parents impact kids, right? Parents lose all their money. They make bad business decisions. They get into debt, whatever. That's going to impact kids. Well, that's not fair to the kids. It's not. Same thing here, right? Adam could only pass along what he had. And he had, at this point, now a lack of God's grace. And so it was passed along to all of us. So because of original sin, because of this sin, as Adam is, and again, this wasn't just Adam, which is one guy sinning. Adam was acting as the head of the human race. He is the kind of the king of all of the humans. And he lost it. And so that sin was passed down. Heaven was closed to all men, right? Because what the Father doesn't have, the children cannot have either. And so heaven was closed until the death of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so when Adam was kicked out of the garden, Scripture tells us that he said, hey, but I'm going to send someone. I'm not just going to leave you alone, right? There's a lot of little things in Scripture in this account that kind of give us a clue as to God's fatherliness and beneficence. Even though he wanted to kick Adam and Eve out of the garden, out of justice, what does it tell them? He goes, well, I'm going to provide you clothes, right? So he gave them clothing. He showed them how to farm. He showed them how to hunt. He showed them these things that they had either lacked knowledge of, or they had lost knowledge of, or that they would need. And God said, you're going to need to work through the sweat of your brow. And everything that comes up from the earth is going to be done through your trials and through your labors. And so this was part of the punishment, right? There's that vivid picture of Adam and Eve walking into thorn bushes. But that's kind of how it was, right? Things weren't going to be easy for them anymore. And so we have the same thing. There's the prayer, the Hail, Holy Queen, that we say at the end of Rosary, and it talks about It talks about Mary kind of helping us through this vale of tears, this valley of tears, right? Life is no longer going to be easy for any human. It's always going to be hard. It's always going to be difficult. Thanks, guys. You messed it up, but that's where we are. So we lost the right to heaven. We lost the right to have all of this great knowledge. But God said, all right, but I'm gonna send someone back who's gonna help. I'm gonna send a woman who's gonna crush the head of the serpent. And through her seed, the gates of heaven will be reopened. And so how does that work? The gates of heaven were opened at the redemption, at the crucifixion. And then through baptism, we now have that right to heaven again. All baptized persons now have the right to heaven, the same way that Adam and Eve had it. Right? Through the sacraments, through this act of redemption, and through the sacraments, now we can regain this right. And that's what we're all about doing today. Was any human person ever preserved from original sin? On the far right side of 41 there. The Blessed Virgin Mary was. Our Lady was. And again, this is a doctrine of the church. We'll talk about it a little bit more. But when we talk about the Immaculate Conception, we're not talking about Jesus being conceived. We're talking about Mary being conceived, right? So her parents, Joachim and Anne, when they conceived her and her soul was infused by God, her soul was given this particular special grace that no one else has, which is she's free from that original sin. She didn't need to be baptized. She didn't need to wait for the gates of heaven to be opened. And it makes sense because she was going to be the tabernacle of God. She was going to be the carrier of God. And so it makes sense that she would be clean and pure from the very beginning. Questions so far? Anything? Good? Okay. A lot of this is probably easy Bible stories that we've gotten so far. All right. So that's original sin. Yeah, go for it.
So I had a short question.
Sure.
So when it comes to the foreknowledge of God with original sin, so like how does it work with the foreknowledge of God? If he were to create humans in a way, he would create by creating them. Can he see that their decision would end with them making the choice to condemn the entire human race? Or is that more of a, because if he sees that, would he not shift the way that they were created so that it would be more balanced with them going to the right side of the equation?
Right. So yeah, that's a great question. Shouldn't have God have done something different in order to kind of make it a little bit easier for them? Yeah, no. I mean, again, God, this is where we get into that tricky part of predestination. Does God know what's going to be happening? Yeah, he knows. But God still gave them the free will to do it, right? So essentially, if God stacked all the deck perfectly for them so that they would always succeed, then what good is there for them to actually succeed? Like, then it would be, he made it really easy already. But if he had stacked the deck to make it impossible for them to fail, it's kind of like playing a game with a kid. Like if you're kind of helping the kid play along and like, well, I'm never going to let you fall, right? I'm going to leave the training wheels on until you are in 4th grade, 5th grade. I'm going to make sure that you never tip over. Well, then how does the child advance and grow, right? You have to let them fall, or you have to let them have the possibility of falling and maybe righting themselves. I think what God was doing here was something similar, where I'm going to provide you something that you can't do. You need to work on yourself a little bit so that you can then be ready to go to heaven. He was giving Adam and Eve a test. If you pass this, your glory is going to be even greater in heaven. Again, going back to the kid on the bike analogy. If you can do this, you're going to be really, really good at it. And I'm going to step away and see how you do. Is that cruel? Right? Again, God doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to do. So our conception of whether or not that's cruel or not is can get kind of tricky, right? But did God know they were going to fall? Yes. It's sort of like it's sort of the same question as why does God allow evil in the world? Same sort of thing. Why does God allow this to happen? An example would be my youngest Sienna, when she was learning how to ride a bike, and she was going down the street and she was all excited and wanted to ride the bike all the time, right? And there was one day she went outside and she didn't have any shoes on, and she's like, I'm going to go ride my bike without my shoes. I'm like, no, you need to put your shoes on. No, I'm fine. I can do it. I'll be fine. I won't get hurt. No, you really should. No, I'll be fine. And what do I know as a dad? Like, she's gonna fall. She's gonna skin her toes. She's gonna get hurt. I let her go. Was that cruel of me? No, she had the free will. She had the choice. I gave her the warning. I gave her the chance. You didn't. Okay. Obviously, you're not going to learn by me telling you. The only way you're going to learn is by skinning your toes. What happened? She got hurt. She skinned her toes. Band-aids, crying, all the things. But now she's never done that again, right? So it's sort of the same thing with, why does God allow evil to happen? Well, so that we can learn, so that we can do better, because we're all kind of children. We all kind of do the same stupid stuff that little kids do. If God had not allowed us to have that chance, we would just be robots. And God doesn't want unfeeling, unthinking robots who are just, oh yeah, God wants me to do this, so I'm just going to do it, and I can't choose evil. No, he's allowing us to choose evil so that we can choose the good. He's allowing us to be tempted so that we can glorify ourselves and fight against that and become better. Why does God allow me to be tempted all the time? So that you can overcome it, become a better person, and glorify him in heaven and have a greater place in heaven. If God didn't allow any temptations, we would just be kind of mediocre. Does that sort of help?
Oh, that definitely does.
Yeah. The idea of God knowing what's going to happen and still allowing it to happen anyway is a tricky one. And it's something that is, right, predestination. Like, how does God allow that? Because he'd be a tyrant if he didn't, is the short answer.
And also, one tiny note.
Yeah.
What about, once again, with the analogy with the parent and the child, with God created the literal will and weakness and strength and decided how that would be gauged. So, with a parent and a child, well, the parent it didn't create the child's will. They didn't form their weaknesses so that they would be more liable to do a weak thing. Whereas
Right.
God designed the human will to be a certain strength, to be a certain capability. So then when God says, don't do this, and they do it, in a way, it's the will that he's given them doing the thing. So it's like a roundabout. It's like a circle.
It is.
It's like it circles back into itself.
Yep. And no, that's a good point. And I think the answer is God created the will in order to be able to choose the good. It wasn't like man was destined to fall, right? There wasn't some world in which there was no way out of it. Adam and Eve were always going to fall. There was a world in which they didn't. God created the will in order to overcome it. It's sort of like, a manager of a football team. I'm going to give the coach all the players. I'm going to give you everything that you need. But the coach uses them incorrectly, throws the kicker on the field to try to block someone. It's not going to work. That's the coach not using the tools, utilizing the tools appropriately. So God gave us all the ability to do it. I think the best answer I can give is that we didn't use it appropriately. We didn't use the gifts appropriately. But the will was there. The will and the ability was there.
Thank you very much. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry for taking so much time.
No.
That was a great answer.
No, you're good. All right, so actual sin, right? That's original sin. Now let's move into actual sin. Actual sin is any sin that we ourselves commit, essentially. It's any willful thought, desire, word, action, or omission forbidden by the law of God. Okay? So those two classes, there's original sin and then there's actual sin. Actual sin is anything that we do. How does it happen? We want to choose something that is contrary to our nature, to the laws of our nature, or to the law of God. And then there are two types of sins as well. There's an exterior sin, so something I do, I steal something, I graffiti something, right? I do something with another, right? Or there's an interior sin where I dwell on hatred towards another, or I lie, or something like that, right? So exterior sins and interior sins. So actual sin, any sin that we ourselves commit. Are all evil actions sinful? Not always. Not all evil acts are sinful, right? There may be times when it's not. So bottom of page 43 there, number 1, when we don't know that the act is sinful, right? So when we think it's perfectly fine to miss Sunday Mass, right? We don't know, so we miss it. Is that a sinful act? No, there's no issue on your end. Second, when the act is done through no fault of our own, right? So this would happen especially like with kids, young adults, right? They want to get to Mass. Parents aren't going to drive them. Well, they know it's wrong, right? The child knows it's wrong, but there's no possibility of them being able to fulfill it. Okay, so there's no fault of your own on that, right? Or third, when we do not consent to the evil. The analogy there is kind of odd. A stronger man may take our hand in spite of our refusal, force it to drop a lighted match into a gasoline tank, and right? We don't consent to it, right? We didn't want it. So those three conditions are necessary for there to be a sin, right? If any one of those are missing, then it is not a sin. So you have to not, if you don't know, or if it's not your fault, or you don't consent to it, okay? On the other hand, we can be guilty of sins which we ourselves do not commit. So when we share in another sin, right? We can participate in someone else's sin by counsel, by command, by consent, by provocation, by praise, by silence, by assistance, right? So there's always like basically being a really bad friend, right? And encouraging or not trying to stop someone, right? Or, my wife, for instance, like I'm gonna go punch this guy, right? She can have a fiery temper. Hasn't punched anyone that I know of, but the day's young. And if I'm like, yeah, I don't really care what you do, that would be me participating in that sin, right? I'm not being a good friend. I'm not being a good spouse and saying, you probably shouldn't, right? We have an impact on others, right? We need to make sure that we're not pushing people to sin or causing, right, or setting people up to fail in terms of sin. There are two kinds of actual sin: mortal sin and venial sin. And then there's all types of other classifications there, which are details. You're welcome to read about them more as you like. Page 44 gets into mortal sin. Mortal sin are big sins, right? That's basically how we classify it. Big sins and little sins. So mortal sins are big sins. These are grievous offenses against the law of God, okay? And there's a lot of different categories of those, which we'll get into. But it's any willful thought, word, action, or omission in serious violation. So examples of mortal sin are blasphemy, willful murder, adultery, arson, robbery, etc. So mortal sin. What's the difference between mortal sin and any other, like telling a white lie, or maybe withholding a little bit more on our taxes than we should, for instance, right? That would be more of like a venial sin. Mortal sin is, it kills the life of Christ in our soul. It kills the life of grace. So essentially what happened with Adam and Eve, where they lost the life of God in their soul and they lost the right to heaven, same thing. Right? We lose the life of God in our soul and we lose the right to heaven. And so it's called depriving ourselves or killing sanctifying grace in our souls. Okay? Mortal sin makes our soul an enemy of God. It takes away all the merit of a good action. So let's say I committed a mortal sin, God forbid, later on today, and then I went and said a rosary and then went to Mass the next morning and then did a lot of other good things. There's like a barrier, there's a block on my soul. Right? When I've committed a mortal sin, I cannot merit any good actions. It's like bulletproof vest. And I don't get those back, right? It's gone, right? So I go to confession on Thursday evening. All right, great. My soul is in sanctifying grace. But all of the things that I did, that supernatural merit is gone, right? I can't get that back. I start again on Thursday. Now, the life of grace that you had in your soul, right, it returns, right? All the merit of the good things that you've had before that is still there. But essentially it's like you again put up a block on yourself. Okay. Three things are necessary to make a sin mortal, very similar to our definition of the three things that are necessary for any sin, but in this case we're just ramping it up. First, bottom of page 45 there. First, the thought, desire, word, action, or omission must be seriously wrong or considered seriously wrong. The matter must be grave. Okay. So a slight act of vanity or impatience, not serious matter, but murder is, right? And broadly, we kind of know what those things are, right? Whether it's mortal or venial, right? We can kind of, and we'll talk more about those as we go. Second, the sinner must be mindful of the serious wrong, okay? So I want to go and I want to embezzle $20,000 from the place where I work, right? That would be a mortal sin, right? That's a lot of money. That's a mortal sin. But if I think it's a venial sin, if I think, oh, it's just, I'm working for Amazon. That's a drop in the bucket. That's not a lot of money. and I do it, then it would be a venial sin, right? So I have to know. I have to know that it's mortal versus venial. And if I think it's venial and it's actually mortal, I'm fine, right? It's just a venial sin, okay? Here's the catch. Vice versa too, right? If I take $5 from John's wallet and I think it's a mortal sin and I do it anyway, well, that ordinarily would be a venial sin. It's just $5, right? But if I think it's mortal and I do it anyway, guess what? I've just committed a mortal sin, right? Because the will, right? The intent is what matters, okay? So the matter matters, the thing matters, but also our intent matters a lot too, okay? And then third, the sinner must fully consent to it, right? So he must be doing it out of his own free will, okay? Something that is hard for us to get around our heads, and even as living as a Catholic for years and years, you're going to try to kind of catch yourself on this. Mortal sin is the greatest evil in the world. Mortal sin is the greatest evil in the world. More than death, more than poverty, more than suffering. Mortal sin is a greater evil than any of those things, than all of those things put together, because it is a direct offense against God, and it is killing the life of God in our soul, right? So we'll get into this when we talk more about sin and the commandments. We're going to have a whole section on the commandments and what's right and wrong and all that kind of stuff, right? A single lie is worse than someone dying, which is kind of crazy for our heads, but it is true, right? Because it is an offense against God, and God is the greatest of all beings. Briefly, we'll look at venial sin, which is a lesser offense. Sometimes we kind of get into this trap, this mind trap of, oh, well, it's just a venial sin. It's fine. I can go ahead and commit a little venial sin, right? Kid comes up to you and is like, well, did you really like this thing that I colored for you? Oh yeah, I loved it. It's the greatest picture in the world. Okay, that's a really small white lie, but it is still a lie, right? Where we're saying like it's the greatest picture in the world, right? We have to be really careful with our words. We have to be really careful with our actions as well, right? Oh, well, it's just a few bucks. I can just take it. It's just a venial sin. We really can't ever get into the trap of saying it's just a venial sin, because the more and more we do venial sins, the more and more we commit venial sins, the more we desensitize ourselves to it, right? We need to try to keep our consciences as good as possible, as pure as possible. The more and more we commit venial sins, it will lead into eventually a mortal sin. Now, by that, I don't mean that venial sins, if you have a certain number, they automatically turn into a mortal sin, right? I'm not saying that. If you commit 100 venial sins, does that mean mortal? No. What I'm saying is the more you commit venial sins, the more used you get to them. And then, oh, it's not so bad to commit a mortal sin. So we have to really fight against even the smallest occasions of sin, okay? The smallest temptations towards sin. Venial sin harms us. It doesn't take away the life of Christ in our soul, the life of God in our soul, but it does harm us, right? It makes us a little bit less fervent. It makes us a little bit less likely to want to do spiritual things, to want to pray, to want to do those things. So it's still an evil, right? It is still a bad thing, and we have to be very careful about that. How do we keep from committing sin? Pray. Pray, pray, pray. Pray in the sacraments, right? The sacraments, these gifts that God has given us, which we'll talk about, but prayer. Prayer is the simplest way, right? There are so many stories of saints who lived an awful life for their whole life, but they still said some prayers every day. There's one famous example of a saint who received of a person who received the gift of final perseverance, right? They lived an awful life their whole life, but yet they still said some prayers every day. That was enough to get them to be able to have the last sacraments right before they died, and they were able to make it to heaven, right? So pray, right? Remember I said before that the good acts that you do, you won't benefit from them when you have mortal sin, but prayer for yourself is an exception to that. If you can still pray for yourself, and that will still benefit you even while you're in mortal sin, okay? So prayer is the way to get rid of sin and to keep yourself from doing sin, okay? All right, we'll pause there for this week. I should have this uploaded by Monday, and I'll send you guys an email with all the links and stuff, okay? Yes. Yeah, go for it.
So this is where I kind of always struggle in my faith, is where it's yeah, I can do horrible things, right? Let's say like for instance, you're in history and you're learning about like the Holocaust and things. And yes, like I understand like some of the German soldiers did it strictly because like what else could they possibly do? But if they're aware of like, what they're doing, like they know what's wrong, like the scientists and all that, and they keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it.
Yeah.
And like they're like, okay, I'm gonna pray. And like, yes, I know like prayer does help. Like I know that deep like in my heart, 'cause, like, but like and they pray and things like that. I know like it doesn't just like get wiped away because like purgatory, you have to like go
Yeah.
through all that jazz.
Yeah.
But it's like it's always like a push and pull for me because it's like
How
like,
could someone so evil
understand,
still?
like, which I am grateful, right? I am grateful because like I sin all the time and like I am forgiven and by the grace of God.
Yeah.
But I'm always like kind of in this like headspace where I'm like, yeah, like they could be a crap person and know what they're doing wrong. Like, they know for a fact this is horrible. And there's kind of like either you do this or you die. Like, I know that's been like their choice. And they're like, well, yeah, like, it's fine. I'm going to keep doing this because like they don't want to die and whatnot. But it's like, then, thankfully I've never been in that situation. But it's always like kind of like where I'm like, that's like the part I struggle with because it's like, I understand, like, why they're forgiven, and no one's excluded from that. But I'm just like, and maybe it's because, like, I don't know much about purgatory and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't get how they can keep being, like, like a crap person all this time. And even, like, the past church I went to would say things like, yeah, like, Hitler did all these bad things. But, like, at the end, if, he repented before his last moment,
Yeah.
he's forgiven. And in my head, I'm like, I understand why, right? I understand. But I'm like,
You get it intellectually, but emotionally, you're like, but how?
Yeah, I get
right?
so
Yeah.
in my head about that. I'm just like, I understand why.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I know we have to pay for it and things like that, but I'm just like, is there like a level to it? Because I know like my friend tells me like when we live our lives, we can either be the people that nail Jesus to the cross or be the ones to help cry it out, and like that's kind of helped me to kind of like visualize it all. I'm like, okay, but why? Like, how is it that they're just like forgiven, I guess, in a sense? Like, I know why, but like, it's like a back and forth for me.
It's a great question, and it's probably not something I can do a lot of justice to right now. So maybe we'll talk about it some more next week. But but I would just say the evil of sin is great. The evil of sin is infinite, right? Because it is an offense against an infinite God. The mercy of God is also infinite. And that mercy is so powerful that it can overcome even the greatest. Something that you and I would be like, Hitler, Pol Pot, right? Some of these awful people who've done awful things. That mercy is so strong that it can penetrate even the darkest sin. And again, I think you said, I get that, but let's dive into it some more next time.
Okay, I'll write it down.
Yeah, fair. Thank you, though. Appreciate it, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to shortchange you.
No, it's okay.
Good morning. Hey, girl, good to see you. How are you doing?